morning, you're watching Business World Live. I'm Dani Laurel.
And I'm Jess De Los Santos. Here are the biggest stories to kickstart this trading day Tuesday. As widely expected, inflation zooms past 5% in May, coming in at 5.4%, the fastest since December 2018.
Motorists are expected to bear the brunt of another big-time oil price hike that affects today.
The Asian Development Bank cautions the Philippines and other Asian countries against imposing new taxes as economies are still in the process of recovering from the pandemic.
And the Department of Agrarian Reform says a kilo of rice worth 20 pesos may be available by early 2023. We begin our broadcast with inflation accelerating to its quickest pace since November of 2018.
Now, as widely expected, the Consumer Price Index surged past 5% in May. Last month's inflation picked up at 5.4%, matching the midpoint of the 5 to 5.8% forecast earlier given by the Bangko Sentral. Now, data from the PSA showed that the May CPI is also the fastest since the 6.1% inflation recorded in November 2018. Major drivers for the inflation in May were the uptick in food prices as well as higher electricity, water, housing, and transport costs. Now, another massive oil price hike takes effect today. Diesel prices have increased by 6 pesos and 55 centavos per liter. Gasoline prices are now higher by 2 pesos and 70 centavos per liter, while kerosene prices are up by 5 pesos and 45 centavos per liter. Year-to-date, pump prices have soared by over 26 pesos per liter of gasoline, while the increase in kerosene has reached more than 34 pesos per liter. Kerosene prices are up by 28 pesos per liter since January.
Now, some drivers have resorted to asking their passengers to pay higher fares.
This is transport regulators say it's unlikely to implement fare hikes to cover for the big-time oil price hikes. Gerard de la Peña has the details.
The Energy Department says the big-time oil price hike is due to the increased demand in countries located at the Northern Hemisphere. Other factors include the more relaxed quarantine restrictions in China as well as Europe's ban on oil imports from Russia.
Napakalaking mga bansa ito sa Europe na definitely itong mawawalang Russian oil, around 3 million barrels of crude oil per day yan. Pag nagkiagaw ito na nga ang perception ng market, definitely tumataas na po ang price.
With this, public utility vehicle drivers are expected to bear the brunt of more expensive pump prices. Person, a jeepney driver, says he hasn't earned enough to buy lunch despite driving since 4 in the morning. He said he has to work more than 12 hours to earn more than his daily average of 300 pesos.
Bawas-bawasan yung kita namin napunta sa gasolinahan.
Rolly, who drives the UP Ikot route, has asked passengers to pay 15 pesos instead of the usual minimum of 9.
Nakikiusap po kami kung pwedeng 15. Kasi yung 15 sir, 120. Kakarga mo yung 80, di 40. Tig-20 lang kami ng operator.
But while oil prices continue to rise, the LTFRB and the Transportation Department says fare hikes of 5 to 6 pesos is unlikely to be approved.
Perhaps if wala na talagang ibang pwedeng ayuda na maibigay, na exhaustan natin ang lahat, perhaps that is the time.
The LTFRB says fuel subsidies worth 5 billion pesos will be released soon, and this will benefit almost 300,000 drivers nationwide. For News 5, Gerard de la Peña, we are One News.
The Energy Department says they cannot project just yet the possible oil price adjustments for next week, citing high volatility. Rino Abad, director of the agency's Oil Industry Management Bureau, says prices keep jumping up and down on a daily basis, making it difficult to speculate on adjustments that could be implemented next week. Abad also tells a big story that Europe's import ban of Russian oil could affect up to 3.1 million barrels of global petroleum products. For now, Abbas says the government must keep looking for funds to increase fuel subsidy for affected sectors, especially for projects like the Pantawid Pasada, as well as fuel discounts under the Agriculture Department.
The bottom line is the government has to look for the funds to provide the necessary subsidy for this plan.
Okay.
Other than that, we really have to go on moving towards looking at the reality that any excess of those increases that will not be covered by subsidy will be passed on ultimately to the consumer.
All right, hot inflation still not letting up. This is prices of crude oil remain volatile and food supply also under threat. Let's talk about that and more with Carlo Asuncion, Chief Economist over at Union Bank. Carlo, good morning.
Morning.
All right. First, your reaction in that inflation figure for the month of May, 5.4%. Still right on cue on the money here when it comes to market expectations. But you were forecasting 5.5%. Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, it's within at least the expectation of the market exactly, which was 5.4%. But we were expecting 5.5 because we're still expecting it to go up this particular month, June, because of a momentum. So, but still, every single day, it's like every single day the situation actually changes. No, as mentioned even in the report previously. No, and 5%. It is what it is. Not at this point. No.
Carlo, much of the expectation is that inflation will somehow be tamed by the latter half of the year. Are you also maintaining that projection, or how far off do you see inflation remaining elevated?
Yeah, our previous forecast is at 4.7 for this year. No? And so we are expecting it to actually taper off towards the I would say about around third quarter to fourth quarter. But still, it's going to be above the government's target of 2 to 4%. So, that's what we're seeing.
Carlo, can we take a step back, and then help us understand, because the oil price is now around 120, but it's been hovering at that level, right? And obviously, this inflation is highly linked, possibly mostly linked to the Russia-Ukraine war. But there is, a number of barrels that we know that we will be losing out on with this ban. The EU ban has already been, or whether if it's in place literally, but it's been announced. And then the Saudi, issue was announced also for the price hike. So why is this priced in now? This 120 is already pricing in the amount of barrels that we will not be having because of this ban, or why is there still a risk that it's going to be higher than this level pa?
The 4.7 that I mentioned was we came up with that I think the last round. So we still have to input these new developments and talk about it, and we initially, for me, I think it's still going to, we're looking at 5.7 for this June as the peak. But for me personally, at least at this point, I'm seeing it may be actually higher. So but we're still hopeful that, as mentioned earlier, that it will taper off eventually.
Okay, Carlo, how long is the pass-through to consumers here? Now we actually see it in the food sector, in the transport sector, vis-a-vis the oil price jumps that we see in the market.
In fact, these when they announced it today, even the previous week, that's going to be like around 6 pesos and some of the products. That thing actually was, I think it was because of last week's, or even a few days before last week, because of because it was probing 120 already that time, and certain things that have been announced, certainly because what you mentioned about the EU's ban and everything. So it will take about at least a week, because even in between weeks or within the week, there are actually changes, because even last week from about, I think that was 122 in the first part of the week, and then it slid down to 118 round about. So with this rise, this Tuesday, the day of prices, I would imagine that again next week there'll be a rollback to some sort, no? So because it's so volatile that way, the response would be like so close, unlike before when when you actually have to wait for quite some time.
Carlo, million-dollar question, no? If this Russia-Ukraine war would have been resolved, hopefully it does, sooner rather than later, what would be the inflation expectation from other domestic issues? Would that not have been for sure, no? Or is this, there's still demand-driven issues here, agriculture, supply issues on that side? Is this still worrying, or is it really just this Russia-Ukraine thing? And if so, if it's just the Russia-Ukraine war, then what more can be done, apart from maybe subsidies, as was mentioned?
I think to your point of is it just because of that? Well, if indeed we eventually settle this militarily when there's no more skirmishes happening, shooting each other and everything, I think it would still take some time. No, I believe that it would still be elevated, and it would take some time for it to ease. No? But once the hostilities end, because you still have these what do you call this, the sanctions that you have to unwind, that you have to deal with. No, so these have actually created havoc in supply chains. So you have to consider that. So, but to your point of what the government can still do, I think prop up still the subsidies, because I think that's one thing, and then of course you still have to look some other ways. Probably they might be forced to actually look at cutting taxes and excise, cutting the excise tax, no? But I don't know. They might be looking at it, or they might look at it, and aside from the subsidies that are already there.
Okay, not that we considered any consolation, but we're not alone in this one. I mean, other countries, of course, are also experiencing the same. Sabi mo nga, mahaba-haba pa. But other than oil, you have other concerns here. Again, food supply also under threat now. And you have a number of countries, some of them our neighbors, in fact, in a food protectionist mode here, the likes of Vietnam and Thailand, wanting to secure their food supply first. How worrisome is this for the Philippines, considering that we import quite a number of food items?
I'd be very worried if it were rice. I'd be worried. I mean, that's my consolation just listening to the PSA report a while back. That the prices of rice are, in fact, even in NCR is negative in terms of the annual basis, and really very marginal in areas outside of NCR. So that's number one. But of course, every time food, because these are the food, meat, the vegetables, these are the three more very important parts of the food and non-alcoholic beverages portion of inflation. And they're very, very critical, and if a certain, the problem of food shortages does happen, that might have to be really looked at and considered as we look at how headline inflation will probably
But I
behave
think,
eventually.
Carlo, there's also room for worry here, considering that you mentioned earlier, as long as hindi bigas yung involved. But yesterday, you have the Agriculture Department warning the possibility of a 6 peso price hike per kilo of rice by year end.
Yeah, well, I think that's well. It's sad that it's going. There's some there because everything is going up. So I think we have to deal with that. We have no choice. But eventually, government has to find ways how to manage that eventually. But I still would like to stress that it's very important that we keep rice, because it's a political food stuff, no? Pag walang bigas, medyo magkakarevolusyon, no? Sabi nga nila, no, medyo we did experience that, no? It was people were really very agitated about it, no? So I think with that, careful management has to be done.
Carlo, before the BSP, the question of raising, a hike rate was really linked to the Fed, going for it and gunning for it. Now, mukhang domestic issues na yung point, diba? Which is already pushing the BSP to act. In this sense, do we have the power to do that? Because you wanted to be as accommodative as possible and not raise rates for as long as possible to be able to at least cushion, we're still in recovery for all of these issues in the pandemic, and then we are forced basically to raise the rates and not just do it on in the timely manner that the central bank governor wanted to do. How would that impact the economy and consumption?
Well, definitely. They're probably looking at it already. We are actually expecting 25 basis points, another 25 basis points this June meeting. But I've been looking at the numbers, so I think I made mention about it to you this morning, about potential, maybe 50-50. They probably go for 50 basis points. But again, part of our inflation forecast and monetary expectation is that they'll probably do a 25 and another 25 in the third quarter. No, but definitely they have to take it slow. I think they're looking at that because they want to be, as you said, favorable to the market, but at the same time, your other hand is making sure that prices don't go aura, as they say. So I think it's a very difficult job that they're doing, and that's their mandate. They have to do it.
Okay, some heavy lifting yet again to be expected from the central bank. Thank you very much for your time this morning, Carlos Sunshon, Chief Economist over at Union Bank. Incoming President Bongbong Marcos has presided over a meeting with the members of his economic team. Now, during the meeting, Marcos outlined his priorities and issued his marching orders to boost economic recovery from the pandemic. Among those present was incoming Finance Chief Ben Jokno. In a separate event, Marcos Jr. also met with several diplomats from Brunei, Italy, and ASEAN member countries. Among the topics discussed with Italian Ambassador Marco Clemente are COVID response and infrastructure projects.
They talked about possible cooperation in infrastructure projects. Oh, by the way, they also talked about COVID responses and opening up the economy. And finally, on person-to-person cooperation, they talked about, the ambassador noted his appreciation of the Filipino community in Italy.
Now, the ADB tells Asian governments, including the Philippines, to be cautious in slapping additional taxes that would likely be a burden to consumers. The ADB explains that the mobilization of tax revenue holds the key to financing higher government spending, which is needed to support sustainable development. But the multilateral lender clarifies that this could be done in the medium term. The ADB warns that the timing of implementing additional taxes is crucial as the growth environment still remains fragile and uncertain. The ADB adds that property taxes should be a key area of focus for developing economies in the ASEAN region. They note that property taxes are very much underutilized in the region due to its limits caused by property market valuation. And in other news, the Department of Agrarian Reform is seeing the possibility of lowering rice prices by the first quarter of next year.
This as the agency looks to achieve the campaign promise of President-elect Bongbong Marcos to bring down rice prices to 20 pesos per kilo. Shiloh Francisco reports.
The Agriculture Department is bracing for higher rice prices by the fourth quarter this year amid higher production costs. Higher prices of fertilizer and petroleum products mean farmers would be using less of these inputs. This will likely impact the harvest during the wet planting season starting September. The problem does not end there. Demand could further increase as countries affected by the wheat ban turn to rice exports as alternatives. With this, the DA expects that prices of regular milled rice will increase by 4 to 6 pesos late this year.
4 to 6 na yan, assuming na walang export ban. Pero kung nag-export ban sila at other wheat-eating countries sa bigas, talagang hindi natin masasabi kung saan naaabot.
This is why the DA is seeking for higher funding to boost productivity. On the other hand, the Department of Agrarian Reform is seeing the possibility of lowering rice prices by the first quarter of next year. This as the promise of President-elect Bongbong Marcos to bring down rice prices to 20 pesos per kilo could be achieved through their programang Benteng Bigas sa Mamamayan project. The project aims to produce mega farms to improve productivity. Once approved, they will start off with 150,000 hectares of rice land with an initial funding of 12 billion pesos.
Kung mayroon farmer yan na tigwa 1 hectare sila, i-consolidate mo yon into mga 50 hectares, no? Para maging bulk yung pag-purchase mo ng lahat. So bababa talaga siya, yung cost of production. Tapos with technical support, ang aim lang niya is mapababa yung production cost. At tapos direct yung magiging pagbebenta from the farm gate to the consumer.
Shaila Francisco, we are One News.
Pausing for a quick break, but coming right up, we'll check how the local bourse is moving following the 5.4% inflation print in May.
More of that and other stories when Business World Live returns. Stay with us. One, two, three.
And you're still watching Business World Live here on One News. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Danny Laurel.
All right, Dan, inflation concerns not going anywhere, but how long can it spook the markets?
Well, you know, Jess, according to Carlos Asuncion, matagal-tagal. But as you said, today is a new day, and yesterday inflation was still the issue, both offshore, onshore. That's what Regina Cap said. Fed tightening, that's on the back of inflation, caused equities to slip. Phil Stocks was saying oil prices, peso weakening. That shot up, of course, yesterday when Saudi Arabia raised its prices. Hopefully priced in, at least for the week. And you can see crude oil still on the uptrend, trading trading at 119.36. But how is the inflation print impacting the markets? As we mentioned already, 5.4% on the money. So really as expected here. And it seems that we're recovering a touch, at least 0.16%, back to 6,700 levels here. And actually in the past 3 days, we finally gained 0.6%. Just very quick check on the big movers here. You've got Converge leading the charges, closing in on a 3% gain. Ayala, Jollibee, and Globe as well. So couple of telco players. SM Prime Holdings, that was a big mover yesterday, up by more than 4% on the back of expectations that the weighting in the FTSE index will be increasing. But you still have some of them sitting out this let's say, recovery. Now, let's take a look at the newcomer of yesterday. That was Raslag, which had an IPO, if you recall. That IPO at 2 pesos, and it did have quite a stellar debut. It opened 24% higher in the first trading day, but after that seems to have gone down. Now, it's actually trading at 2 pesos and 8 centavos, still 4% compared to the IPO price, but far from, the highs that it saw, up to 2.48 even yesterday. But what's very, very interesting is, according to APSEC of Carlos Temporal says, he's from APSEC, the fair value might be 2 pesos and 40 centavos. So there's actually quite some upside here. Meanwhile, let's take a look at the other, solar companies here. Particularly, you can see the C-REIT and SPNEC. Take a look at this SPNEC. That is, of course, Solar Philippines in Nueva Ecija. That is down by close to 2% in the past just 3 days here. That fell by more than 4% yesterday. 3-day losses already, 13% rather. So today, again, another 4th day of loss. And this is something that Astrodel Castillo at First Grade Finance says there might be some shifting going on from those who invested in Leandro Leviste's stock towards Raslag, especially if SPNEC fails to deliver on the promised capacity. So very interesting space to be watching out there, Jess. The solar players are now, in the spotlight.
Now on the corporate front, Tiger Resort board members filed a complaint against Japanese businessman Kazuo Okada following what they call a forceful takeover of Casino Resort Okada, Manila. In a press conference, the board members removed by Okada said they filed the complaint before the Justice Department for the alleged brutal, forceful, and anomalous takeover of Okada, Manila. The director cited various offenses such as grave coercion, unjust vexation, slight physical injuries, kidnapping, and serious illegal detention. Aside from Mr. Okada, the complaints were filed against several other respondents, including Antonio Coanco and Dindo Espeleta.
Now, ABS-CBN said it is exploring various partnership opportunities that will enable it to share its content both locally and globally. This is in response to reports that it was, in quote, evolving and dynamic discussions with TV5. Now, without confirming any details about the talks, ABS-CBN says it is simply exploring content distribution opportunities to reach wider audiences.
And that's a first look into the business day this Tuesday, June 7, 2022. Join us again tomorrow at exactly 9:30 a.m. You can also catch us on Signal Play. Register for a free account now at www.signalplay.com and stream One News live anytime, anywhere. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Danny Laurel. Mask on, wash hands, stay safe, Philippines. We are One News.